So Falcons have signed another superstar to their team. Wow. And we're all wondering, is this move a good move? Wow. So Falcons have signed Kyousuke. He's a 16-year-old coming from Russia, and he's been touted as the next Dunk. People's expectations of him are absolutely massive, and he's coming into a team with top 5 players at least of recent years, Niko and m0NESY. First of all, please ignore the ball in my hand, it happens often, and I'd like to bring all of your attention to the screen behind me, which is showing a match some of you might remember being Vitality vs Falcons final at IEM Melbourne 2025. You might remember, yes, this is one of the worst chokes we have witnessed in modern Counter-Strike, and it was all Niko's fault. I've got this up as somewhat of a case study behind Falcons' real problem, not their lack of firepower really, apart from Unk, who was really struggling and shit in the bed towards the end, but their mental. So with Kyousuke going to Falcons, you would really expect him to have taken TSS's roles, a more aggressive rifler with more active positions, but instead they've benched evil and intimidating Magisk. Perhaps it's to keep him away from Niko and m0NESY's relationship, but also it's because he's just not as good at shooting as TSS is. However, this move is a strange one. We've seen teams make sacrifices for firepower before. Sometimes it works, think Mobs being moved to anchor roles in G2, but sometimes it just doesn't work because these players have to adapt to new roles. But of course, trying to predict this is a little bit futile. I mean, nobody really knows how Kyousuke is going to perform, especially considering the pressure that will no doubt be on him as he comes up to a top 5 team after fooling around in Spirit Academy for only about a year now. Because not many people seem to be talking about just how new he is to the scene at all. He was signed to Spirit Academy in the middle of 2024, only a few months after Dunk had already won Katowice with his 1.70 record-breaking rating. So to give the best estimate that I can perhaps on how he is actually going to perform, I do want to set up some criteria and do a little case study here with you guys. So I'm going to take a look at 2 prodigies that came before him in somewhat similar, somewhat different circumstances. I'm talking about Dunk and m0NESY. 2 similar Russian children who spawned out of the wilderness to take the top 5 CS. So we're going to be taking a look at how these children performed when they were in their academy teams, how they were performing when they were moved up to their tier 1 rosters, and what the different context was for the promotions of each of these players, because that is the most important thing. So for our first child, we have m0NESY. I'm choosing him first because of chronologically, at that time back in 2022 when he was signed to G2, it wasn't a very popular thing as it is today to have these stars rise up out of nowhere and be competing for possibly top 1 place on HLTV, apart from maybe Zywoo coming up in 2019 in Vitality, but at that point that was really an exception, whereas today it's getting a lot more popular. So m0NESY as a little child was signed to Navi Jr. in 2020. Where he had a pretty successful first year, all things considered, for his very young age. He's about 14-15 at this time. But the real juice came from in 2021, his last year on Navi Jr. before being signed to G2, when he actually put up a 1.36 rating. Now, m0NESY's promotion was probably, you couldn't imagine a more stressful situation for a young child coming into tier 1, as he was put onto G2, a team known for its troublesome rosters, switching out players, and extreme immense pressure because of its huge fan base to actually win trophies, which they had not been doing a lot of. So when he came into G2, he put up a 1.17 rating, which is a far cry from the heights he achieved on Navi Jr., but then again, this is now against tier 1 opposition, and all things considered, he still managed to get number 7 player in the world of his debut year in 2022. So the pressure was obviously extremely high for m0NESY, but it must be mentioned that he did have Niko, who probably nurtured him as a player and helped him become the player he is today. Who knows if he would have been able to do it without the help of Niko, who he also clearly holds in a very high regard, as he did literally follow him to Falcons and look entirely dejected for the 6 months that he played on G2 without him. So if we take a little bit of a look at Dunk, his story does kind of mimic Kyousuke's a little bit more in the fact that he was only on Team Spirit's Academy for about a year. And over this year on Team Spirit's Academy, interestingly, he only put up a 1.20 rating, substantially lower than m0NESY's, but then we think about his debut year in tier 1, and he outperformed m0NESY by a large margin. So when Donk moved to Team Spirit in July 2023, for the rest of the year he put up a 1.35 rating, a massive increase despite the increase in the level of competition. But it is important to mention that the variables were different here to when m0NESY went to G2, or with Kyousuke now going to Falcons, just because Team Spirit were not really a tier 1 team at all when Donk was moved up to the main roster. They'd completely overhauled the roster, bringing up 3 players because Team Spirit weren't in a great spot. They hadn't done anything memorable at all really since the Antwerp Major in 2022 when they made it to the semi-finals. They got bounced by FaZe Clan. So by the time Spirit had actually built up enough of a reputation and got an invite to an actual proper tier 1 event in 2024 at the start, it was Katowice, and by that point Donk did actually have 6 months or so of actually playing with this team for a whole season before the expectations were actually on him to start performing on the big stage. Not to take anything away from Donk, he is obviously a goated fucking child despite his shit trim, and he should be respected for what he's been able to do. So as we've seen, Donk and m0NESY both have very different pathways up. Donk actually improved after stepping up from the academy team, and m0NESY did drop down, but that does line up with the expectations of the teams they were moved up to, m0NESY going to a top 5 team and Donk being imported into somewhat of a struggling team. So if we look at Kyousuke from May 2024 to June 2025, he's put up a 1.29 rating in Team Spirit's academy, which is obviously pretty damn good. Not as good as m0NESY and Navi Jr., although m0NESY is an AWPer, which should be considered as well, but it's a lot higher than what Donk did in Spirit Academy. It is kind of impossible to actually predict how he's going to perform in a top 5 team that will be gunning for trophies. It is important to mention though that he will have m0NESY, who went through a similar story to him, and also Niko, a veteran who has been known to be able to nurture riflers and AWPers. And while that's interesting, it's impossible to kind of ignore what's going on back there, but now I'd like to introduce the word of the day, which is choke. And now we all love a Falcons choke. We all love more in particular a Niko choke, because he's made somewhat of a name for himself, not only being a great rifler, but also doing that, choking. And I was possessed by these thoughts recently. I would look at Niko, and every time I did, it just looked like he was struggling with something. So I took a little look back throughout the years, and I myself have been a Niko fan almost to the point of I would stalk the guy, but I looked at his performances in majors in particular, and in the last 5 years, every single major performance, apart from Stockholm maybe, has included a massive choke to get eliminated. Now, I don't really count Stockholm as a massive choke because they made it to the finals, and yes, he may have whiffed those bullets, but I do think Navi would have wiped them up in the 3rd map if it did go there either way, because G2 were the massive underdogs. But as you're about to see from the rest of these chokes that I will be doing a little power ranking on with some very nice criteria. So this playing in the background has had me in tears. I've taken little crying breaks in between making this video, but if we look at this game, Vitality were about to be dethroned as the #1 team in the world during the 5th map of this grand final in Melbourne, as Falcons led 12-6 on the last map. For about 20 minutes there, Falcons were the best team in the world, and they were doing it. But Niko had something to say about that. In round 22, Niko essentially gives up the round by not clearing a common angle under silo, giving up an opening death, but that's only the beginning of the choke here. In round 23, Falcons lose a 5v3 post plant on the B site, where Niko has his worst deagle whiff since Stockholm. 5v3 post plant. What the fuck? In round 24 for overtime, Niko gives up yet another opening death by losing an aim duel to Apex of all people. Now, despite Apex's better position, Niko certainly had a chance here. And just to push the buttons a little further, Niko had 15 kills at 12-6 as they were about to take the fucking tournament, and he entered overtime with 16. 16. That's not it. But enough about that. This isn't a major. It's not for the legacy that Niko is looking for. So here we have it. The top 6 best, funniest moment Niko chokes of all time. Are we ready? So what, coming in at number 6, see, I've decided to start after Stockholm, as for reasons I've already explained, but coming in at number 6 is actually Antwerp. Because to be fair to G2, they did get quite close to the playoffs, 2-2 game versus Furia. Do you think Furia? Furia's alright. Furia are not even a top 10 team at this tournament, and they managed to let it go to a third map where Niko had the lowest amount of kills on G2 with a 0.95 rating to go out so close to the playoffs against Furia. No. So then we have Paris. I've got Paris so low, even though it was an extremely disappointing end to Niko's last CSGO major. I think it was more of a problem than just Niko at this tournament. So he obviously did crumble under the pressure and choked because it was his last chance to win a CSGO major, which is a common running theme here. So in the 1-2 bracket against Fnatic, they somehow let map 3 be Vertigo, a map where Niko and m0NESY famously are just kind of simply shit. On this third map, Niko went 14-23 with an absolutely banging 0.72 rating. Wow, this is an incredible choke. And now coming in at number 4, we've got Rio. Rio in 2022, G2 had overhauled the team as they kicked out the biggest fraud in the scene, Alexi B. They had signed Hooksy and they had also signed JKS. Nice. No, actually, it's not very nice because they didn't even make the Rio Major at the end of 2022. Now, they didn't even make the Major. Why is this choke so low on the list? I just think the other ones are funnier, to be honest. So they lose a best of 1 against 1 win with this hilarious lineup. And then they face Gamer Legion, a team ranked 60th in the world at the time. And I mean, Niko's stats weren't terrible here, but they lost to Gamer Legion. I spent 6 weeks in tears after this loss, as I'm sure many of you did too, and that's only number 4. Then we have the number 3 worst choke of the last 5 years of majors, or it was actually Copenhagen. You might be thinking, a major choke in Copenhagen is higher up than ones where they didn't even make the major. They made the playoffs in Copenhagen. So they were in the semi-finals against Na'Vi, who weren't even really meant to be there. A lot of people love this Na'Vi team, but it was kind of comprised of a lot of tier 2 players that popped the fuck off at the Paris major. I was very skeptical of this team, and you got to imagine how I felt because I was there at the Copenhagen major. I was sitting there. I was cheering for Niko the whole time, and I see Alexi B get up on that stage, and I think there's no way Alexi B, of all people, is going to stop Niko, my Niko, from making it to a major final? No. But then came the round. I wonder if any of you remember this round. It was a round on Anubis. The first map of the semi-final. It was all looking well and good. We had a post plant. Yes, me, Niko, and Hunter against Alexi B, of all people, on the B side of Anubis. And it's an unlosable post plant, really. The bomb is planted for both players who were hiding connector, and they managed to fold under absolutely zero pressure and go out to give Alexi B the clutch just to make him feel better. I do genuinely believe, though, that this round did give away the map, and probably the whole game when you think about it. Surely their mental must have been destroyed after such an unlosable round being lost, which is a pattern. So Alexi B shitter managed to take the series to 3 maps, a third map again at a major where Niko just couldn't handle it. I'm talking shit in the shit covered bed. He went 15-17. That is a 0.96 rating on my GOAT in a major semi-final to a team of... Now we've got the second worst choke of all time, ever. That is, of course, Shanghai 2024. Fucking hell, getting up early to watch this game at what time, like 7 o'clock in the morning, to watch my Niko once again in a semi-final. I thought there's no way they're going to make the same mistakes. They had Mobs on their team now, who was far back. They made it to the semi-finals of Copenhagen with fucking Nexa. So the addition of Mobs and having won 2 tournaments in the lead up to Shanghai, they were actually one of the favorites to win the entire event. And they make it into the semi-finals of the tournament, and it's against FaZe Clan, the team that had done literally nothing since getting to the major final in Copenhagen. And FaZe Clan, having been shit, beat G2 2-0 without breaking much of his sweat, where Niko utterly shit the bed bottom fragging with 0.79 rating, and Snacks having a masterclass. Now, just as one of the greatest riflers of all time, you can't sit back in a major semi-final, lose to an extreme underdog team, and watch Snacks top frag. And the number 1 choke of all time, you know it, we all love it, we've all seen it. It's Austin, the father of all chokes, the 5v3 post plant choke, unlosable round against MIBR. Once again, a team that wasn't even meant to be able to nearly beat a top 5 team like Falcons, but Niko and his friends once again shit their pants in the face of the slightest danger. So in this game, Niko had 6 kills coming into overtime and 8 kills into double overtime. That's 8 kills over 30 rounds for who's GOAT? And now we did finish the game with more kills at the end, but Jesus fucking Christ, man. They didn't even make the third stage where they could make it to playoffs. They completely crumbled. So there we go. I'm sure I'm not the only one now who's thoroughly depressed after hearing about all this misery. But I guess we'll just have to see what Kyousuke does. Now that Niko and Monacy are free from the shackles that was evil and intimidating Magisk, I wonder if they'll actually be able to bring it home. Now I don't know, and you don't know either, I've got a feeling, so we're just gonna have to wait till Cologne. I'm sure they can find a third Russian child to bring into Falcons if it doesn't go well anyway.